Ever notice a cat intensely focused on something we might completely overlook? Or, how they can be utterly unfazed by a loud bang 1 minute?
And then jump at a tiny rustle the next.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of observation is really at the heart of the book, All Cats Have Asperger's Syndrome. It uses those really captivating photos of cats
Mm.
to illustrate characteristics often associated with Asperger's, which, well, we now understand is part of the autism spectrum.
And in this deep dive, we're going to explore that very connection. We've pulled together insights from, well, everywhere: psychology, neuroscience, animal behavior, sociology, even literature,
Wow, okay.
to really try and get a comprehensive understanding of this pretty well-known metaphor. Our goal is to trace its origins, figure out its implications, and sort of assess its accuracy and usefulness.
Right, because you're someone who isn't afraid to tackle complex subjects, but you also value clarity. You want things straightforward. We want to give you a clear, insightful perspective on this cat autism link.
Without getting bogged down in jargon.
Yeah, exactly. No overwhelming technical stuff. Okay, let's unpack this. Where should we start? Maybe the book itself.
Good idea. So, Kathy Hoopman wrote All Cats Have Asperger's Syndrome.
Right.
First published back in 2006.
Okay.
And her main aim was really to fill a gap. At that time, most of the information out there about Asperger's was pretty much geared towards adults.
Right. Very clinical, perhaps.
Often, yeah.
Ah.
She wanted to create something accessible, something relatable for children, families, and, young people themselves. Like a quick, easy intro to the topic.
And the way she did it is so engaging, isn't it? These wonderful color photographs of cats,
Just doing their cat things.
paired with really simple captions. They draw parallels between cat behaviors and traits seen in autism. Remember one, a cat with its ears pricked right up.
Yeah, and the caption mentioned sensitive hearing. The publisher called it a gentle introduction, touching, humorous, insightful.
That sounds about right.
And it definitely tried to highlight things like that sensitivity to sound or being easily startled, things you might see in cats and some autistic individuals.
And importantly, the tone.
Yeah.
It feels really positive, right? Validating.
Absolutely. It emphasizes that, just like our pets, people with Asperger's or autism are valuable. They have their own unique strengths, their potential.
Such a crucial message. And didn't Tony Atwood, the autism expert, praise it?
He did, yeah. He liked its balanced portrayal, showing both strengths and challenges, but in a really accessible, almost playful way.
Makes sense. Oh, and it got retitled later, didn't it?
It did, yeah. In 2020, retitled to All Cats Have Autism to reflect the updated terminology, the shift away from Asperger's syndrome as a separate thing.
Got it. Okay, so let's dig into the actual comparisons then, the psychological ones. What are these apparent similarities?
Well, if we define the core characteristics of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, we're generally talking about differences in social communication and interaction, and also the presence of restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. And often, unique ways of processing sensory information come into play, too.
And this is where the cat parallels start jumping out, I suppose. Like, cats can seem quite independent, maybe aloof sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book might draw a comparison there to differences in social reciprocity or perhaps reduced eye contact that can be part of autism for some people.
Okay, I see that.
Then there's the routine thing. Anyone who lives with a cat knows.
Oh, yeah. Don't move the furniture.
Uh-huh, right. They really value predictability, changes in their environment, their schedule, that can be genuinely stressful for them.
Which feels analogous maybe to the insistence on sameness, that preference for routine we often see in autism.
It's a clear parallel people make. And their sensory world. You mentioned the hearing earlier.
Incredible range, yeah. And they react strongly sometimes, don't they? Certain sounds, textures.
Definitely. And the book uses the sensitive hearing, being easily startled, to illustrate the kind of hyporeactivity to sensory input that many autistic people experience.
But hang on, is it the same thing happening? A cat hearing a mouse versus a person being overwhelmed by supermarket lights?
That's a crucial distinction. While the outward presentation might look a bit similar, a strong reaction to sensory input, the underlying reasons are very different.
Okay.
A cat's hearing is, well, it's a product of evolution. It's honed for hunting, for survival.
Makes sense.
Whereas in autism, sensory sensitivities stem from differences in neurological processing, how the brain handles that incoming information. So similar outcome maybe, but different origin.
Right, so it's more of a superficial resemblance in that case. What about repetitive behaviors?
Yeah, think about a cat grooming meticulously for ages or, endlessly batting at a dust mote in a sunbeam.
Or chasing a laser pointer?
Exactly. That can feel a bit like the repetitive movements, sometimes called stimming, or the very focused interests we see in autism.
And the book plays with that.
It does. It uses anthropomorphism deliberately. Like, there's an example, I think, of a cat with its tongue sticking out slightly, and the caption is something like, says exactly what they mean.
Oh, okay. Linking a physical cat quirk to a direct communication style.
Precisely. But again, it's vital to remember these behavioral parallels, routine, senses, even social style, they come from fundamentally different places.
Cat instincts versus human neurodevelopment.
Exactly. Cat behaviors is evolution, feline needs. Autism, a human neurodevelopmental condition. The reason the metaphor resonates psychologically is because of those observable behaviors.
This looks similar on the surface.
Right. But the why behind them is different. Still, that core idea of a cat being kind of in its own world, noticing details, not loving change, that seems to be where the connection really lands for people.
It definitely feels relatable on that level. Okay, let's shift gears. What about neuroscience? What does the brain science say?
Well, it's really important to understand that the characteristics we see in autism aren't just personality quirks. They stem from actual differences in brain structure and function.
No.
Neuroscience often describes autism as a distributed neural systems disorder, which sounds complex, but basically means there are differences in how various brain regions connect and communicate with each other.
So, like, the wiring is different, the network connections.
That's a good way to put it. Research using tools like fMRI, EEG, it suggests that the networks involved in processing sensory information and social cues operate differently in autistic brains.
And that could explain things like sensory sensitivities.
It could certainly contribute, yeah. That difficulty with unexpected changes or feeling overwhelmed by certain sounds or lights might relate to how the brain is processing that incoming flood of information.
Okay. And how does that compare to a cat's brain? Is there any overlap there?
Well, a cat's brain is fundamentally wired for being a predator, highly efficient. We talked about the auditory cortex. It's exceptionally tuned for survival, for detecting prey, potential dangers.
A very specific evolutionary path.
Exactly. It's a specialized adaptation for their ecological niche. It's not the same complex interplay of developmental factors in a human brain that leads to the diverse sensory experiences in autism.
So, my kid reacting intensely to a clothing tag isn't the same mechanism as a cat hearing a high-pitched noise miles away.
Correct. Different neural pathways, different developmental processes are involved. Neuroscience really shows that while some behaviors might look similar on the surface, they're rooted in entirely different biological setups in cats versus autistic humans.
That clarifies things. Different wiring, different purposes.
Temple Grandin's work is really interesting here.
Oh, right. The animal scientist who's also autistic.
Yes. She's pointed out that both autistic people and animals often seem to think in sensory details, like pictures, and can notice really fine details that others miss.
So a similarity in processing style, maybe.
Yeah.
Focusing on the sensory.
Potentially, yes. But neuroscience would again emphasize that the reasons behind that sensory focus, the fundamental neurobiology, are different in autistic humans compared to animals.
Okay. So from a neuroscience perspective, maybe some broad parallels, sensory awareness, needing predictability.
Yeah.
But the idea that cats have autism neurologically, that's purely metaphorical.
Precisely. Autistic traits reflect unique patterns of human neurodevelopment. It's not a shared condition across species in that sense.
Got it. Okay, what about cats themselves? Their actual behavior. Are they really these aloof, solitary creatures the metaphor sometimes implies?
Well, that's where animal behavior studies get really interesting. It turns out domestic cats often have much richer social lives than we might assume.
Really?
Yeah. They're definitely capable of forming strong bonds, strong attachments to humans, especially if they're well socialized when they're young kittens.
Huh. I think a lot of people still picture them as purely independent.
They do maintain independence, for sure. But research shows that socialized cats use a whole range of cues, visual, vocal, to communicate with their owners. Scientists even talk about specific friendliness behaviors directed towards humans.
Like rubbing or purring.
Things like that, yeah. And there was this cool experiment with puzzle boxes. Cats had to figure out how to get food out.
Okay.
The cats that had lots of positive interaction with people early on, they learned much faster. They were better problem solvers than the cats that weren't as well socialized.
Wow, so early interaction really shapes their cognitive abilities, not just their affection levels.
It seems to influence their cognitive flexibility, yeah. And another study used sound playing recordings of the owner's voice from different spots.
What did they find?
The cats acted surprised when the voice came from an unexpected location, suggesting they actually have a kind of mental map of where their owner usually is. It shows a level of social and spatial awareness.
That's fascinating. So they're not just passively reacting. They have expectations about us.
It seems so. And Temple Grandin's insights bridge nicely here too, thinking about animal cognition. But the key thing from these behavior studies is the variability.
Meaning not all cats are the same.
Exactly. Some cats are super outgoing, really cuddly. Others are much more reserved, timid maybe. But even the timid ones can learn from humans, adapt. And we know the human-cat bond can actually reduce stress in the cat.
So the idea that all cats are inherently asocial or aloof, that just doesn't hold up.
Not according to the science, no. They have complex social capabilities.
And that definitely complicates the all cats have autism metaphor, doesn't it?
It does. Because if cats can form attachments, can respond socially in these complex ways, that challenges the direct comparison to some core social communication differences in autism.
Right. Though autistic people also have diverse social experiences.
Precisely. Cats can be friendly and responsive, just like autistic people have a huge range of social abilities and ways of connecting, even if they differ from neurotypical norms. The studies show cats aren't simple stereotypes.
Okay, let's switch to the cultural angle. Why has this specific metaphor become so popular? Cats are huge online, obviously.
Oh, definitely. And I think the cat as autistic metaphor really thrives because it taps into cultural ideas about both cats and artistic traits. Often, it offers a more positive, relatable frame than, say, older medical views.
How so?
Well, socioculturally, cats often symbolize things like independence, individuality, maybe a different way of interacting.
Qualities sometimes associated with autism.
Exactly. I read an autism blog once where someone observed that cats, being both aloof and affectionate, kind of embodies the diversity within the autism spectrum itself.
That's an interesting take. And you see it online in neurodiversity communities, right?
Absolutely. The whole cat person identity seems pretty common among autistic folks online. Cats pop up as mascots in memes. I've definitely seen that phrase, dogs are allistic, cats are autistic.
Huh. Yeah, I've seen that too.
And the sheer force of internet cat culture, the videos, the pictures, everything, it's undeniably given this metaphor a massive boost in reach and relatability.
Is there maybe something deeper too, like cats being seen as outsiders?
I think that resonates. That cultural association of cats with being independent spirits may be a bit mysterious, not always following the pack. That can definitely connect with the experiences of some autistic individuals who might feel outside the neurotypical mainstream.
But there are warnings too, right, about taking it too far?
Yes, definitely. You see cautions, for example, from people in fields like ABA, reminding us that, no single animal can truly represent the whole vast autism spectrum. Using these analogies needs care, respect for individuality.
Makes sense.
But overall, the appeal seems to be that the cat metaphor often frames neurodiversity positively. Independent, lovable in their own unique way, quirky maybe, but also intelligent.
Okay. And thinking about the book itself as, like, a piece of writing, how does it work rhetorically?
Well, from a literary perspective, All Cats Have Asperger's Syndrome is basically an extended animal metaphor. That's its core technique.
Giving animals human traits.
Exactly, anthropomorphism. Kathy Hoopman deliberately gives these cats human-like thoughts or feelings so that each picture and caption works like a tiny fable. Using an animal's action to illustrate a human characteristic. It's a classic literary device.
And cats specifically carry a lot of symbolic weight, don't they? Mystery, self-sufficiency.
Sharp senses. Yeah, they come loaded with cultural meanings. And many of those meanings, independence, unique perspective, sensitivity, overlap with how some autistic people describe their own experiences.
Temple Grandin comes up again here, too.
Her comparisons between autistic and animal thinking, especially that thinking in pictures idea, that focus on details, it provides a kind of backdrop. Hoopman's book uses that similar idea of a feline lens to reframe autism not as a deficit, but as just a different, valid way of seeing the world.
And the photos themselves. Using cute cats must be deliberate.
Oh, absolutely. The charming cat photography is key. It softens the message, makes it less clinical, more approachable. It invites empathy.
How so?
Well, you connect with the cat, right? You see its sensitivity, its focus, and that maybe creates a little bridge to understanding similar experiences in an autistic child or adult. It uses something familiar, beloved cats, to add warmth and humor to what can be a serious topic.
So the literary power is in that familiar, warm imagery making the message accessible.
Yeah, the anthropomorphism makes the psychological comparisons feel intuitive, at least initially. But like any metaphor, it's not perfect. There are criticisms, things we need to consider.
Right. What are the main concerns people raise?
Well, first off, the book has been generally really well received. Lots of people, including autistic adults, have said it helped them feel seen, understood. They like the positive tone, the humor.
A truth in humor idea.
Exactly. But there's also caution, particularly from some self-advocates and academics. The main worry is that any analogy comparing autistic people to animals, even with good intentions, risks reinforcing old, demeaning stereotypes.
Yeah, I can see that risk. The implication of being less than human.
Precisely. Some critiques argue that these kinds of comparisons, generally speaking, can inadvertently contribute to dehumanization. Plus, there's the issue of diversity again.
Oversimplification.
Right. The autism spectrum is incredibly broad. Can one animal, like a cat, really capture all that variation? Probably not. Not every autistic person is going to relate to cat-like traits.
And the language changed too, didn't it? From Asperger's.
Mm-hmm. The original title used Asperger syndrome, which isn't the main diagnostic term anymore. The retitling to All Cats Have Autism reflects that change, but also, I think, a growing awareness and sensitivity in the community about language.
Like preferring autistic person.
Often, yeah. Identity-first language is preferred by many. And there's just more caution now about potentially misleading metaphors or outdated labels.
So the concerns aren't necessarily about Hoopman's original intent, but maybe how the metaphor lands, how it's used more broadly.
I think that's fair to say. When it's presented thoughtfully, like in the book, with that positive framing, it can be a helpful starting point. It can build empathy.
But it shouldn't be the end point.
Exactly. It needs to be a bridge, not a label. And it should always come with the clear understanding that people aren't animals, even if we see interesting behavioral parallels. Respect for individuality is key.
Right. You can't just say, oh, he's autistic, he's like a cat, and leave it there.
Definitely not. That misses the whole point and the humanity. But the book itself, its core message, is quite affirming, isn't it?
Yeah, that ending note. Every individual, cat or human, has unique gifts and needs support. It aligns with neurodiversity principles.
It does. So if we synthesize all this deep dive into the all cats have autism metaphor shows it's a relatable and often positive lens, especially as an introduction, popularized by Hoopman's book, drawing parallels with cat behaviors we observe.
And it's crucial to remember it's a metaphor, not literal science. Neuroscience, animal behavior. They show some surface similarities, sure, but also really fundamental differences.
Mm-hmm. Cats have their own complex lives, their own cognition. Autism is a uniquely human neurodevelopmental experience, incredibly varied.
So the key takeaway really is about using these comparisons thoughtfully, respectfully, always remembering the individuality, the complexity of autism, and avoiding anything that feels dehumanizing.
Absolutely. And that leads us to a final thought for you, listening. How do metaphors and analogies shape our understanding of complex human conditions in general?
That's a great question. It's worth thinking about their power, but also their limits. Maybe consider other common metaphors used for neurological or psychological differences and how well they actually capture the reality.